I'm a board director at TMMi. I'll start over since we just, in case I missed it. So I'm Amanda Fetch. I'm a board director at TMMi, and I'm based in New York City. At this point in my career, I've worked about 25 years, give or take, in the analytics, data science, and machine learning spaces. And within that time, I've dabbled in retail, entertainment, biotech, government, intelligence, and now the space industries. And so I'm about to finish up my PhD in a few months for Capital Technology University based outside of DC in tech and AI. And so my research there focuses on enhancing space situational awareness, managing orbital debris through tech and AI. I'm also involved in a ton of projects on the side as part of this research. So working with the United States Central Command, so CENTCOM, as an advisor as part of their virtual student federal service program. They're basically looking to implement OpenAI to automate intelligence processes, working with US Department of State, as well, part of the PhD research with Gen AI Solutions, again, as part of that virtual student federal service program. Working with the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative as a senior fellow, and with the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation as a chair for their machine learning and AI working groups on a couple boards, advising a couple companies. But anyway, I want to give you that background before I jump in to the topic. So again, the topic today is generative AI, bridging the gap between perception and reality. And I've done a couple talks on this. The first point we're going to hit on within the agenda is skepticism, because I was very skeptical about Gen AI in general and how it basically can be turned into an opportunity. I'm going to speak about generative AI in academia, industry acceptance of Gen AI, some real world applications that are currently out there. Last times I spoke about this, a lot of companies were still sort of dabbling, but there wasn't a ton of, I guess I'd say, different strategies and things like that actually in place or in production. How to overcome some of those misconceptions. And then at the end, for those who might not be familiar with TMMi, I wanted to just sort of, and this is kind of my own thought process on how maybe you could take the TMMi model and sort of apply it to maybe some sort of AI adoption or something like that. I thought it's an interesting take on it that I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So as I said, you can see on this slide, isn't Gen AI just for summarizing? I mean, and so if you're not working in Gen AI, I mean, that was me. And that's why I started speaking on the topic, because for myself, I basically thought, again, it was a tool for summarizing. I thought it was a buzzword. You know, I thought it was almost like a bona fide Google type of thing, where if I'd ask it a question, it's probably going to be one big hallucination. Why should I trust this thing? And what kind of got my wheels turning and what started to change my mind was I took a course, and it was an AI product manager course. And basically what we were tasked with was going in and building a plan for pretty much like an MVP for a product. And basically we were supposed to use these tools to pretty much generate this thing. And for me, I was like, I can't do this. I don't trust the thing. I'm not a quote prompt engineer, which was the buzzword. I don't know about all this. But I was like, you know what? I took the course. This is what we're tasked to do. So I'm going to do it. So I dove in, and I decided my goal was to develop a social listening platform. So for those in marketing to kind of see and get a feel and taste of what the consumers are thinking about your products, kind of thing. And so I used ChatGPT. That's the one I decided to use. And I basically pulled back like market insights. I did a competitor analysis, customer pain points, the features of the MVP, roadmap, risks, even a technical architecture, which for me, I'm more of a data science background. So I'm not exactly a programmer by trade. So for me, the architecture, I could definitely use help on that front. So used it for that as well. And then this thing spit out for me what was deemed by the instructor pretty much almost a perfect plan. She's like, it's pretty much too perfect. Okay, now I won't give it all the credit because of course I finessed it a little bit and things like that. But because of that specific project, that's what got me thinking, you know what, I should look into this thing. Maybe this thing isn't just for summarizing. And so before I get into industry, I wanted to touch a little bit on academia, since again, that's kind of how I started to get a taste for this. And so what we hear a lot about in academia is pretty much these tools, I should say, are used for cheating, right? We see ads, and if you look at the comments on social media for some of these things, that the comments sometimes are horrendous. They're like, oh, nice way to cheat. In my day, it wasn't so easy. I mean, it's pretty horrendous. some of the negative connotation you're going to see on these things. But a lot of educational institutions, higher learning, I'm going to sort of name drop in particular, that kind of decided to come up with policies or plans on this and how they would use it in their institutions. So one of them, UPenn, they basically allowed the faculty to go out and make the policies, as they saw fit for their students. And so some of them, said use it for tasks like revising drafts, generating ideas. We hear a lot about use it for brainstorming, use it to maybe improve your writing, research, organizational skills. And so basically their thought process was students are going to use it anyway, whether we allow them in this classroom or not. So why not we teach them how to use this stuff responsibly so that when they go out in the world, we give them the tools to do so. Now, Cornell had a similar approach, but one of the policies I found for them was more focused on the research process and the literature review process and things like that. So again, they kind of had guidelines for how you can sort of organize and summarize your literature review and generate hypotheses and things like that. But what they did was have this sort of word of caution that, you can do this, but the quote unquote buzzword of hallucinations, which is a controversial term. Some people don't even like the term hallucinations, but basically you can use it, but what this thing spits out, you do know you're responsible for all of this. And this is your work and your research. And, anybody out there that's a researcher, that in the end, you need your research to be reproducible. You need to make sure it's valid and that it's ethically sound. So there was kind of like that disclaimer sort of put out on that. So spinning, kind of moving forward here to some misconceptions about industry now. So I think industry has definitely gotten better, but we start out with industry with, oops, I jumped ahead. Similar to this sort of stifling of creative thinking and critical thinking. So not necessarily cheating, but again, it's like it's inhabiting people rather than sort of pushing them forward and things like that. So, oops, I think somebody's on mic. I think we have a hot mic. So anyway, so coming back to this, really, if you change your mindset, the tech can really act as a tool to spark curiosity and facilitate sort of like an intellectual exploration rather than a stifling. And so we hear about this a lot. And I should say there's a lot of debate on using this in like the entertainment industry. So in art, writing, music, things like that. And so one thing I would say is, yes, it can generate content, but with the human involved, you're always going to have more emotional depth, cultural significance, personal experiences. That's really what's going to make the work and the quote unquote art, in my opinion, at least, more unique. And so these human creators, I mean, they're still going to bring you originality. They're going to have emotional connection. I mean, we're not robots yet. We might be on the way to it, but the robots still can't necessarily sort of bring that cultural, societal context and things like that. There it's really all about the context. Another sort of misconception, I guess I should say fear, are deep fakes out there in industry. And so it's not just on social media where somebody's afraid somebody's going to make a video of themselves, right? There's deep fakes in all kinds of, places and things like that. But, one thing with the deep fakes, I mean, there are tools to identify this stuff. There's digital tagging systems out there. Microsoft, if you want to look into it, they have like a video authenticator, for example. And so there's tools out there that can start to mitigate these things. So it's not all doom and gloom. Now, before I get into the quote unquote scary stuff, like autonomous weapons and stuff like that, one thing to remember here, but it's a misconception for many still, at least a lot of people that aren't sort of deep into the industry, maybe as some of us are, is there's this sort of thought process that these models, once we sort of put things out there and we start using these algorithms, that they can sort of autonomously learn and that they can evolve on their own. But the truth is, I mean, we really need human intervention. I mean, these things typically now they require new data, they need to be retrained. And, that stuff is really done in the background by humans. And then when we start thinking about these things in the Terminator effect, that's when you start hitting on like the terms like AGI, so artificial general intelligence. And that's kind of where you would start dabbling in this whole autonomous learning and evolution kind of theme, which, some out there are saying they've hit on it, they're about to get there. I don't think we're there yet. But that's what would lead to the quote unquote scary stuff. So like the Terminator effect, where there's this uncontrollable, like catastrophic outcomes, things like that. A lot of that, I mean, that's like based in science fiction still. Again, these models, they're not humans, they lack a consciousness, which could also be scary. Self-awareness, I mean, but they're functioning now within strict parameters set by the creators and the designers and developers of these things. And, right now they're really behind walls of like safety protocols and things like that. So they can't kind of go beyond their design capabilities. Now, as far as the autonomous weapons thing, as somebody who's, kind of dabbling in the government a little bit as well, if you look into this stuff, nobody's saying that they're not out there. Okay, so autonomous weapons have been developed, they're in use, things like that. But autonomous weapon, again, doesn't mean they're out there making their own decisions. I mean, for example, I'm based in the United States. The military is very committed. There's still sort of this human oversight going on there. The Pentagon, for example, there's strict policies on this, that AI in defense has to be used responsibly. Humans are retaining the control over the most critical decisions. There's strict guidelines and norms on this, and it's not just us. This is an international thing. So, again, we're not quite at the Terminator yet. Now, getting into some like law enforcement, surveillance, that's when we start to hear a lot about bias and unethical things going on in that sort of realm. Yeah, AI can process data and analyze it more quickly. It can identify patterns and trends. But with that being said, when we use these things, I mean, we just have to be transparent on how they're built. We have to take accountability. There has to be rigorous testing, things like that. Just to touch lightly before I kind of move ahead to the next slide is there's also some misconceptions about the healthcare, in the healthcare system, because we're starting to see that with doctors using it for like diagnosis, things like that, based on patient notes, that they might have all of these unstructured data of patient notes that it's very tough for them to sift through. But if they could start using generative AI within that process to help them, diagnose or come up with a patient profile, things like that, what happens at that point is it's freeing them up for more personalized interactions with their patients. So this is the debate again, where some people say, well, it's going to be more, depersonalized, these situations. But others will tell you, no, actually, it's going to free up the HCPs, the healthcare providers, so that they can actually spend more time with their patients. And just one more thing before I move on here, there's also this sort of misconception that things like generative AI and AI in general can start to sort of exacerbate social inequalities. And so really what I mean by that is that because these tools are so sort of resource intensive, that, those in underdeveloped countries and things like that, they're never going to have access, they're never going to catch up, kind of thing. But what I will say, this isn't something that's brushed, under the rug, it's on the radar. A lot of big companies are making investments in education, infrastructure, policy development, things like that, to try to mitigate some of that. So, I wanted to touch on it, it's on the radar. But again, I think, we could make progress in that area. So moving along to some real world applications, when I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, when I sort of started looking into these things, a lot of these things were still really in pilot. So, a lot of companies were dabbling, but they weren't really putting anything in production. So a couple of things I wanted to touch on. I also put, an article down there that lists a lot of these as well that are interesting that came out, but in a couple different industries and areas. I wanted to mention a few cool things that are being worked on this front. So Click Therapeutics, they're using Google Gemini, And basically within Google Workspace, they analyze large volumes of pretty much what I was talking about before, patient feedback, though for this one, from clinical trials. And so the Gen AI can help them identify patterns and trends that the human, due to this sort of large data set, could potentially miss. And so this is how they can start to adjust treatments to better address patient needs and things like that. ADT and security, this I thought was pretty interesting and cool. So they're using advanced video analytics in their smart security cameras. And basically what it's doing is it'll know whether it's a person, a vehicle, an animal, something like that. And it could basically send targeted alerts by user preferences to the person that's, using these feeds and things like that. So it's pretty interesting. So they can analyze sort of the live feeds, and they can minimize like these false positives of what's actually out there, what's coming across on their camera, things like that. And so that's when they can, further enhance like facial recognition technology and different technologies like that. So Best Buy and retail, so they also used Google's Gemini and Vertex AI platform, and they created virtual assistant. So we're seeing this a lot. Again, for them, they use it for like customer troubleshooting of product issues, managing deliveries, handling memberships through self-service options, things like that. Another retail, Home Depot, they're using Sidekick app. So they're assisting their store associates with their prioritizing of tasks, managing inventory, enhancing customer service. I started out in retail, so I know what it's like to, have to do inventory management on your own, and it's rough. The USPTO, so the US Patent and Trademark Office, this is when it starts getting interesting, because they are using this thing, or at least piloting it, to improve quality and speed of reviews. So they can start to enhance accuracy and reducing time of patent and processing their applications. So that's interesting, because these things can take forever if you're out there in this world and you have an app in. Wayfair, so they're using Gen AI in the form of code assist. And so basically what they found with that, they were working with the developers, they were using code assist. So they were setting up their environments like 55% faster. So they saw results just by using this, for example. And so one thing I want to say is, as I'm going through all these in various industries, I have on the bottom of the slide, this does not mean, there's this debate that everybody's going to lose their job tomorrow. Like AI is just taking over, in all of these areas, and jobs are being lost. Yes, in some cases jobs are being lost, but a lot of times they're revamping into different areas. So that's when the whole, I don't want to get into it, that's not the topic of the discussion, but that's where we need the whole reskilling, retraining, things like that, and getting people up to speed to make sure this doesn't happen, kind of thing. And so how do we overcome this stuff, right? Like, what can we do about this for people who still are thinking about these misconceptions, which a lot are? So education awareness, that's going to be key. Organizations have to provide sort of clear, accessible information about AI's capabilities and their limitations to dispel these myths. They could offer training, workshops, explain how AI works to some of those that are less technical, to get that sort of fear factor out of the organization. Talk about its potential, its boundaries, and they could promote resources, again, to sort of talk about differentiating AI from machine learning, from this sort of AGI, again, that artificial general intelligence, and that we're not at the Terminator effect yet, things like that, and that's going to lead into being transparent, explainable. Most companies now, when they're looking into these things, that's key for them. They want, explainable AI. And so again, that just allows for decisions to be more transparent. Another strategy, human-centered AI design. So that's keeping your human in the loop, right? So you got to keep the human oversight collab with these systems. And again, that's when you could also start to enhance decision-making without this sort of fear of you're being replaced. Okay, one of those kind of things. Ethical AI practices. If you haven't taken a look, Google's AI principles, okay? Just one example of how organizations should, if they're not, adopt ethical frameworks to basically guide the responsible use within the organization and, outside with partners, things like that, of AI. And then again, just reiterating, communications is essential. You need to really position AI, Gen AI, specifically as a tool that's going to enhance. Okay, it's going to enhance creativity, productivity, decision-making. It's not here to replace kind of thing. So before I wrap up, you are joining us here today again with TMMi. So this is sort of something I had thought about on the back end. And so if you're not familiar with the TMMi, sorry, I need more coffee. TMMi maturity model, okay? This is a way we can look at it on maybe adopting AI in the eyes of the model kind of thing. So if you're brand new, you can kind of see to the model, and I'll guide you a little bit on the thought process on this. So the model really can serve as a roadmap for adopting AI. And it can sort of help organizations move from sort of that ad hoc AI experiments to fully optimizing your processes. And so this ties in because you can address those misconceptions that I was discussing and concerns over bias, AI autonomy, things like that by kind of following this model. And so you start out at the ground level, okay, in the initial experimentation phase. And then you start to progress through managing, formalizing some AI projects, levels 2 and 3. Then you're going to want to measure results in level 4. And then ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to optimize your process in level 5. And so in each stage, the model can kind of guide you to ensure that AI is being adopted effectively within the organization. And so to dig in a little deeper, and then I'll open it up, see if anybody has any thoughts or questions or anything like that. So again, this level 1, sort of this ad hoc adoption. So this is where a lot of times organizations are experimenting, okay? And it could be in isolated cases. Maybe they don't have a cohesive strategy. And so if you could think of the framework here, the TMMi framework here, you could start to encourage, maybe establishing some basic policies, establish some goals, ensure that this sort of early AI initiatives have a clear direction and they're not just sort of sporadic. Then you can sort of get into that manage stage, okay? So where you're now managing your AI experiments. And so now it's when AI is kind of integrated into specific projects. So it might still remain siloed, okay? And it's inconsistently managed. But again, if you kind of look at this framework, maybe it can help you formalize your project management processes, introduce sort of basic performance tracking for applications. And then you can kind of start transitioning into some isolated pilots that are a bit more consistent. Now maybe you can start to have a little bit of repeatable practices kind of thing. And then once you're in the middle here at level 3, that's when you can kind of start defining and standardizing AI policies. So now you can start to begin to implement these standardized policies across like departments. You could start creating sort of organizational frameworks for AI governance. You could have guidelines for training, ethical use, compliance, all that kind of quote unquote fun stuff for all of us, right? And then by level 4, you want to start measuring. So now you're going to measure your AI results and really evaluate the impact of AI on any of your KPIs. So your key performance metrics, productivity, quality, efficiency, things like that. And then to kind of wrap this up here, level 5. Now you want to optimize, right? So your organization, they can continuously refine their AI applications to achieve their sort of peak efficiency levels. And so again, what I would say is, to summarize this as a whole, when you look at this through the eyes of the TMMi model, it kind of offers a powerful framework to kind of guide organizations through the AI adoption journey. And so you can apply the principles. Again, you can sort of systematically now, instead of sort of willy-nilly, which a lot of companies you wouldn't think they're doing, but they are, now you can sort of systematically now move through the stages of your AI integration. And then that's when you're going to start you're going to start adopting responsibly, effectively at sort of each stage of maturity as you're kind of working through this. Yeah, so with that being said, we have a couple minutes left. I wanted to go ahead and wrap up and see if anybody has any comments, questions, or things like that. Thanks for joining us. Todd, hello. You gave a thumbs up.
Hi, Amanda. Awesome.
Hello.
I'm sorry I was late, but I'm loving this. Thank you. Hey,
No worries. I'm glad everybody could join. Hi, Umesh. I can't see everybody, but I'm going down through here. It's a pleasure to see everyone. Hi, Monica. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
So much. Thank you so much for, I think practically speaking, I joined a little late and got to understand about this program just a little bit from Umesh, and I think it's pretty interesting to be part of this one. And while I was looking at this TMMi maturity model, I think wanted to really understand how you can resonate this from an HR perspective, because I'm heading in HR and I understand while I'm implementing multiple Gen AI modules in our day-to-day working, but there's a lot of challenge which I'm facing on ground while it comes to our strategic and confidential information within HR. So wanted to understand, how do you think this Gen AI can really, really help us build a strong, mature model within HR?
Yeah, so I mean, that could go a lot of different ways. But what I
I'm
say
sure.
is,
I'm sure.
you know, a lot of times what I see in companies, and you may have already seen this as well, so apologies if you've heard this, but a lot of companies, the way they're using it in HR is literally going through sort of their company policies, whether it's like literally benefits or whatever it is, right? Kind of training the
So,
model on all of those and creating sort of in-house chatbots. And that's how they kind of start using this as a pilot in different departments to see how, you know, again, some of the questions, you know, maybe it's a basic question like, how much PTO do I have? You know, whatever it
correct.
is. And they're starting it out very basic. But again, you have to be careful because now, you know, you're feeding this with individuals' PII and data, right? So that's where it could start to be scary. So we could really get into like a deep dive. So I know we're almost at time now, but you know, I'd love to connect too. We could sort of, you know, put thoughts together on something like that as well. I'm not an HR professional, but I just have, you know, some ideas in general of how I've seen it, you know, implemented personally.
Yeah, yeah.
But interesting question.
Perfect, perfect. And I think, yes, we can definitely understand the technology part of it, which you bring it onto the table. And I can add on the HR perspective for that. So thank you so much for it. Appreciate it.
Let's see. Yeah, well, I think we're about at time. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to jump in. Anybody from TMI, have any final thoughts or anything, since we're about at time?
Amanda, this is a great session, so thank you so much. I think this is definitely going to be a great beneficial one for even for mapping the team of practices using AI. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, well, no more questions. I think for the first time, I didn't talk too much. I hit the time. So if anybody, you know, would like to connect after, you know, please connect. I use LinkedIn. You could just find me just by Amanda Fetch by the name. But it was a pleasure seeing everybody today. And, you know, definitely check us out, TMMI America. And yeah, thank you for joining us.